So here we are. Welcome, welcome to 1 year later. Whew, today marks 1 year since the murder of George Floyd. And today is the day that sparked the start of these events. 1 year ago, we at Black on Black Education decided that there was a void in the education system and in the collective of our community. There's not enough space for people to come into community with others, be educated, as well as be in conversation, civil conversation around race and equity and anti-racism. And so tonight, 1 year later, we are going to reflect on what has happened over the course of the last year, progress that has been made, some rewinds that we have made, some accomplishments that we have made. And I'm really looking forward to being in conversation with you all. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you for choosing to spend tonight with us. And let's get started. In the chat while I'm getting started, if you can let me know who you are, where you come from in the world, why you decided to join us tonight. Send the link to some friends if you want some other folks to kind of join the conversation, and let's get into it. So you're probably, if it's your first time here, you're probably sitting here wondering, who is this woman who's sitting up here talking to me? Well, my name is Eva Loren Jean Charles. I am the founder of Black on Black Education, along with my father, Jamal Thomas. And I started Black on Black Education in the end of 2019 because I realized that Black students were not getting what they needed, and we had to figure out ways to do that. So I'm dedicated to supporting Black students. It is in everything that I do, because I believe that when we work toward equity for the most marginalized of us, the entirety of our excuse me, of our society gets better. So yeah, let's keep it pushing. And so a few things to note: it has been an entire year since we have been holding these I'm anti-racist versus I'm not racist sessions. And we have not had, I don't think we've had anyone leave and say that they hated the conversation. I don't think we've had anyone leave and say that it's been a horrible experience for them. And we are graced with the presence of Miss Anna, who's been here from day one, has not missed one anti-racism event since the start. And we are so grateful and thankful for her support. She has been one of our strongest supporters and allies throughout this entire year. And I think it's time for her to graduate to that co-conspirator title, because she's incredible. She's doing the work, and we really, really, really appreciate you. Could not get through this event without shouting you out. And so, like I said, today it's a little bit more monologue-y than I enjoy, but there was a lot of information that we wanted to make sure we chalked into this conversation before we got into full group discussion. So although I will be talking of quite a bit, we will have space and time for all of us to get into discourse together. And please actively listen, engage. I know folks are out and about, but any way that you want to engage and speak to us, we would absolutely love to hear your voices. So now, if you are able and in a position to turn your cameras on, we always enjoy that. Makes it a little bit more personable. We can see each other. But if you can't, you're not in a position to, that's absolutely fine as well. And now we will kind of get into the content. I mean, this video always warms my heart. So I thought we could get started with this short video, Gianna Floyd, the daughter of George Floyd, in response to the outcry that happened after her father's death.
That's right, Daddy changed the world. What? He did what? Daddy changed the world.
George Floyd did change the world. He didn't want to change the world. He didn't ask to change the world. But the events of this day 1 year ago did change the world. And my heart goes out to George Floyd's family today. My heart goes out to his daughter today. And I'm so glad to be in community around debriefing his life and ultimately his legacy. So we always start our events by defining anti-racism. We define it the exact same way since we started these events. Anti-racism is the work of actively opposing racism in our political, economic, and social lives. I think a lot of people get stuck on that social point. Hey, I'm not a part of the KKK. I don't say racial slurs. I don't say negative things about Black people. I believe we're all the same. I don't see color. These are things that we hear all of the time because we so much focus our ideas and our thoughts about anti-racism to the social piece. But it is important for people to understand that racism is just as much, if not more, embedded in our political and economic life, which negatively affects the lives of Black people and people of color in this country. So there are multiple definitions. People use different ways to describe and explain what anti-racism is. But what is really, really important for us to note is that anti-racism is actively opposing. It's not saying I'm not racist and throwing your hands up. It's deciding that you're a part of the change that needs to happen. And we always like to shout out Miss Angela Davis when she says, in a racist society, it's not enough to be non-racist. We must be anti-racist. And that's what we're all in this space striving to do. And so we have seen in the last couple of weeks, unfortunately, this idea that white supremacy is not an issue that we need to be dealing with actively. And so let's define white supremacy as we move into this moment. White supremacy is the belief that white people constitute a superior race and should therefore dominate society, typically to the exclusion or detriment of other racial and ethnic groups. So the purpose of these events is to aid in dismantling this idea of white supremacy, so much because it is in so much of our social, economic, and political lives. We must end white supremacy, and the only way to do that is by pulling in anti-racist, pro-Black, and pro-people of color policies and practices. Now let's talk 1 year later. What is the legislation? What are the things that have genuinely, tangibly changed since this day 1 year ago? George Floyd Justice and Policing Act of 2020 was passed by the House last year. And so the purpose of this piece of legislation was to increase accountability for law enforcement, misconduct, and making sure that there were restrictions of use of certain police practices, such as kneeling on the neck of a person, chokeholds, other things of that nature. It enhanced transparency and data collection and establishes best practices and training requirements. But we've heard this story before. We are also want to make sure that we look at what happened in California. California passed a bill September 30th that banned the use of chokeholds and allowed the State Department of Justice to investigate police shootings. It's very interesting to me that the Justice Department could not investigate police shootings before. And so it's insane that we're looking at a piece of legislation that is created based off an event that happened that should have already been in place, but I digress. We also are talking about Georgia. Georgia signed a bipartisan bill on June 23rd, requiring police officers to document when someone is subjected to a hate crime on the basis of race, sexual orientation, gender identity, disability, religion, or national origin. So they have finally decided that hate crime is something that can happen in Georgia, and that there should be laws on the books that protect people of protected classes. Legislation continues to happen. So in states like California, Minnesota, Pennsylvania, Washington, Connecticut, Washington, DC, Iowa, Texas, Arizona, Florida, Colorado, Georgia, Massachusetts, and Kentucky, the states have made changes in legislation regarding bans to tear gas, to chokeholds, requiring body cameras, requiring increased transparency, thinking about what innovative policing practices look like, and ending the use of no-knock warrants. You can tell that there are not 50 states on this slide, which means that all 50 states have not decided that the events of 1 year ago and the events that have continued to happen since then require political action. And so that's really important when we begin to think about anti-racism. what our politicians and the people we have in power believe is important is integral to the conversation about being an anti-racist, going back to our definition that tells us and reminds us that we cannot only think about racism from the social standpoint, we must also think about racism and how it impacts and negatively affects us socially, politically, and economically. So let's think about the initial response. Let's take ourselves back to this time a year ago and what was going on in the world. And so we're gonna just watch this quick video together.
No justice, no peace. No racist police. And we don't get it. And we don't get it. Shut it down. How would you describe the atmosphere? Toxic, ready to go. All right, it's just waiting somebody break the camel, and it's gonna go down. It could have been my son. Yeah. It could have been my son. It could have been me. It could have been my family. It could have been. It's unjust. It shouldn't be. It shouldn't be. It shouldn't be. It shouldn't be. Keep the peace. 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 Uno way.
So I don't know about anybody else, but that was difficult to watch. And it was difficult to watch for several reasons. I have a lot of people who I love and I care about who were out there. I have a lot of people that this doesn't want to close, that I love and that I care about that have dedicated their lives to the ending of police brutality. And so this is what we were looking at. I mean, in the first couple of images, like this picture right here, this looks like a war zone. And every time I look at this and I think about the protests and the things that were happening this time last year, I think about what Martin Luther King said in the 60s. A riot is the, what does he say? A riot is the language of a people who are unheard. I butchered it. But police brutality didn't start in 2020. It didn't start in California when we had the Rodney King situation. It was just on camera. And so when the frustration around what is happening and the relationship between communities of color and the police, it is the response to being unheard consistently year after year, generation after generation. Let's look at what the media looked like. There was more attention brought to the phenomena of trauma porn. So there was more of a conversation about what we should be posting and not reposting. You'll notice that Black on Black education will never post the violent death of a Black person or another person of color. It is and has been seen to be extremely traumatizing or desensitizing to Black people and people of color. And so it is important that you think about that when you make choices around what you're going to post or repost in your social media. It brought more attention to the idea that social justice needed to be in our education system. So we're looking at headlines that say why every school district should be required to teach multicultural education. Every teacher that I know, every school that I know was looking for anti-racist policy, anti-racist PD, anti-racist practices, because this event set our world on fire. We're looking at other headlines that say teachers are trying to figure out how to discuss the Derek Chauvin trial in class. Black legislators are championing Illinois' ambitious education bill. Delaware bill could establish Black history education for grades K through 12 in each school district. I mean, we're looking at people just now realizing that Black history is an important thing to talk about because we watched a police officer kneel on the neck of a man for 8 minutes. Why does it take something so extreme for us to have this conversation? And so 1 year later, we're looking at these conversations still happening. Turn on the news right now. The news cycle is steadily around these same conversations. And now we're thinking, well, have these things changed? During our last event, we talked about Ma'Khia Bryant and Dante Wright and Adam Toledo and more, who just a few months ago were all within 10 days murdered by the police. Despite the fact that there have been these positive changes, something is still wrong with the relationship between the police and communities of color. Something is still going wrong. And so all those legislations that we talked about, we're still seeing, these are all children under the age of 20 years old who have interactions with the police and now no longer have a life. Something has to happen, something has to change, and it's a moral change just as much as it's a legislative one. We have to continue to talk about systemic racism. Unfortunately, systemic racism continues to perpetuate every aspect of our society. We are looking at employment, we're looking at housing, we're looking at government surveillance and who is being surveilled and who isn't. We're looking at incarceration and the rates in which some groups of people are being incarcerated over others. We're looking at drug arrests, immigration policy, healthcare, education, wealth, food, diet. It can seem super overwhelming looking at all of these things and saying, oh my God, racism is embedded in all of them. How the heck do we ever get out of here? Well, I think the start is by acknowledging its existence, right? Realizing that it's there, it's a smog that's all around us, just like we talked about with our white dominant culture session. It is something that has been embedded in the creation of our country. And in the same way that no one said, hey, let's reform slavery, they said we had to abolish it. That's the same way we have to begin to think about racism systemically in all of these different sectors of our lives. Well, I look at this picture and I think about it all the time as a track athlete. If I started at the 400 meter mark and someone else started at the 100 meter mark and they shoot that gun, that person starting at 100 meters could be the slowest person to have ever lived, and they will likely still make it to the finish line before I do. We have to think about the United States in that very same way and think about the policies and practices that need to be set in place to close this gap. 246 years, decades of discriminatory policies and practices that haven't ended yet. Policies and practices have to be created for the other side. Now we begin to think about COVID. We begin to think about other sectors of our life. So healthcare. With the COVID crisis, 40 million Americans lost their jobs and 3.3 million businesses shut down, including 41% of all Black-owned enterprises. We have to think about the economic impact. The Black-white gap persists even among boys who grow up in the same neighborhood. So we're not just talking about, oh, I live in one zip code and you live in another. Because even when you live in the same, you're not treated the same. So when we control for parental income, Black boys have lower incomes in adults than white boys in 99% of the census tracts. Overall, 17.8% of white borrowers were given higher price mortgages when borrowing from large banks in 2006, yet 30.9% of Hispanics and a staggering 41.5% of African Americans got higher price mortgages. Why? These are things that we have to begin to question. Holistically, 1 year later, we are not just talking about the police. We have to begin to think about how the entirety of our society is dealing with this historical trauma. No, none of us in this event, none of us of our friends, our family members, we did not create this, but it is our job. It It is our duty to be a part of dismantling it. So now we want to think a little bit more about healthcare. Give you guys an example. And this person, this What is Systemic Racism, has a whole set. So I'll send the link in the chat as well, but has a whole set of really short videos that break down various different sectors of systemic racism in really short bite-sized amounts. So if you're someone who plans on being a doctor one day, you might be really focused on the healthcare portion, but you as a teacher or as a salesperson can look at the various different other opportunities in really short stints. So we're gonna play this one, like we have incarceration, we have immigration arrests, and they're 1-minute videos to give it to you short and sweet, and you can go in and find more information on the things that you are interested in knowing more about. So we'll just start with this one.
Oh, hey, I didn't see you there. You know, if you're like most Americans, you probably say to yourself all the time, systemic racism. Is that really a thing? Well, did you know that even though America's infant mortality rates have gone way down in the last 50 years, Black babies are still about 2.5 times more likely to die before reaching their first birthday? Did you know that Black mothers are 3 times more likely to die during childbirth? That Black and Hispanic women are more than twice as likely not to receive proper prenatal care? And Native American mothers are 3 times less likely to receive proper care? Did you know that? Do you know what that's called? That's called systemic racism. And yes, it's really a thing.
Short and sweet. And so just knowing those, it just doesn't like to close. Just knowing those things helps us to begin to understand how this has just become a part of our everyday life. And without, did I stop sharing my screen? Boom. And to understand how they come to be without us knowing these things. That none of those statistics are something that I've seen on the 5 o'clock news. So it's important that we begin to find outlets that can give us information that aren't necessarily being given to us in our schools, in the professional developments we receive, so on and so forth. And so now the hot topic in terms of race today is critical race theory and the newfound attempt to ban it in schools across the country. I take a deep breath and we move forward. There's been a debate all over the country about whether or not critical race theory should be included in the curriculum. This event is not about critical race theory, but we thought it would be remiss not to speak about it, knowing that it's a current event, knowing that it's happening right now, knowing so many people are misinformed, but we are definitely going to do a full event particularly dedicated to critical race theory so that we can make sure that folks know what this is and do not vote to ban it. So there are 5 major components or tenets of critical race theory. 1, the notion that racism is ordinary and not aberrational. A lot of people think that racism is this taboo thing that like sits in the corner and only some people choose to pick it up and like use it to negatively affect people. Unfortunately, that is not the case. Critical race theory tells us that it is ordinary. Why is it ordinary? Because it has always been here. When we think about normal versus not normal, unfortunately, normal in the United States of America is living in a society where racist practices have been embedded in the policies that we have created here. 2, the idea of interest convergence. So critical race theory really wants people to begin to think something my dad says all the time. We don't necessarily have to be like-minded, but we have to be like-hearted. Critical race theory says that we need to look at where our interests converge and start from there. The social construction of race. Critical race theory really tries to break down for people that race is not and has never been biological. Although there are thousands upon thousands upon thousands of articles that will tell you otherwise, those articles were created by people who needed a racial hierarchy to exist and found and did fake science and found fake ways to make people believe that the way that they were oppressing a certain people was okay because of their biology. That is untrue, that has been debunked, and we need to continue to have that conversation so that we don't have the reality that a ridiculous amount of people in medical school believe that Black people have thicker skin than white people, or that we're able to take more pain than they do. Oh, can't even get into all of that. That's not what this event is about. 4, the idea of storytelling and counter storytelling. History is a story, right there in the word. The story of the world, the story of people, the story of engagement, the story of events, the story of life. That is what history is. But unfortunately, we all have heard it before. The person who won gets to tell the story. And the person who won just so happened to be the giant political power that had guns. And so by having guns, by having access to overpower other places, colonialism allowed for the story that was told to be told from one lens. And now we're beginning to truly understand the importance of telling the counter story. Just because I won does not mean that there is not another story told by the people on the other side. Talk to somebody who was born and raised in Georgia. They're going to tell you a very different story of the Civil War than what we learn here in New York. And 5, the notion that whites have actually been the recipients of civil rights legislation. So a big conversation and a big part of critical race theory is beginning to think about affirmative action, for example, and think about the fact that the highest population of people in our country who receive benefits of affirmative action are white women. And there's nothing wrong with that fact, but that fact is not well known. And then you have students who go to colleges and somehow people believe we got in because of affirmative action. So it's needing to understand the realities of our society rather than, again, the whitewash story versus the counter story. And just to give a full and fleshed out definition of what critical race theory is, it is a theoretical. So it is not a literal, like, this is what life is and how it's a theory that helps us better understand the way that race plays a role in our society. A theoretical and interpretive mode that examines the appearance of race and racism across dominant culture modes of expression. In adopting this approach, critical race scholars attempt to understand how victims of systemic racism are affected by cultural perceptions of race and how they're able to represent themselves to counter that prejudice. What critical race theory attempts to do is to ask ourselves a lot of questions about how race has played a role in our lives, how race has played a role in other people's lives, and how race continues in 2021 to play a large role in the educational outcomes as well as the economic and social outcomes of people. Thank you, thank you. So let's keep it moving, and we can share this with all your friends who may not be here about critical race theory. The link will be sent to you tomorrow. And so the debate on whether or not critical race theory should be integrated into school curriculums is hot right now. Oklahoma recently signed HB 1775, aiming to eradicate the supposed scourge of critical race theory from state classrooms and campuses. I would love this Governor Kevin Stint to explain to me what critical race theory is. And then maybe we should put it on the docket around whether we should ban it or not. I feel like if he could explain it the way I just explained it, and then it would still be a problem for him to try to ban it, but I highly doubt he'd be able to do that. Idaho lawmakers have advanced a bill that would prohibit public schools, including public universities, from teaching that any sex, race, ethnicity, religion, color, or national origin is inherently superior or inferior, which according to the bill is often found in critical race theory. I don't know where they got that from. I'm not sure where they got that from. But here we are. The Tennessee General Assembly has officially banned the teaching of critical race theory, passing a law at the very end of the legislative session to withhold funding from public schools that teach about white privilege. This is where we are in 2021. On the date after we had like nonstop news cycle. If it wasn't about COVID, it was about advancing anti-racism in the schools. Amazon, Walmart, everybody was like, yes, we have to be anti-racist. Where are they? I'm waiting. Where's the statement? I'm wondering. I'm just saying, I'm wondering where it is. Anti-racist, diverse, and inclusive teaching is being politicized and mislabeled as critical race theory. Teachers, educators, folks who have dedicated their lives to learning these things, who've gotten PhDs in these things, are being discredited and told that the theories that they base their core values around is a tool for hate. It is, for me, I'm not understanding it, but it's where we are. And hopefully all of you in here, we have all really come to an understanding of what critical race theory is, and we're armed with enough knowledge to take that and use it to best support others' understanding of critical race theory and why it is an integral part of teaching and learning for young people and for adults in our society. Where we are today, we also have to start looking at our anti-protest laws. The vast majority of the protests that happened all throughout last summer were peaceful protests. The vast majority of the protests that happened all throughout last summer were peaceful protests. And yet, policies were created to negatively affect people's ability to assemble. The GOP lawmakers in 34 states have introduced 81 anti-protest bills during the 2021 legislative session. Where was this energy during Charlottesville? Anybody? Is anybody? Can anybody? No? Just me? I'm just wondering where the same energy was when like the Ku Klux Klan was like straight outside with like tiki torches saying, get out of our land. But I digress. These laws are intended to make it more difficult for people to protest even peacefully, with many redefining what a riot actually means in the state. These bills have been an egregious attack on the First Amendment right to protest. And so let's look at some of the states that have pending legislation on this. We've got Nevada, New Hampshire, New Jersey, and New York. They'll increase the penalty for incitement of riot, punishable up to 4 years in prison. But what does it mean to incite a riot? In New Jersey, would make it a felony to block traffic. Would make blocking traffic during a protest punishable by up to 1.5 years in prison and a $10,000 fine. Would expand the definition of riot to any group whose disorderly conduct results in property damage. Again, where was this energy during Charlottesville? In New Hampshire, they'll create a new legal justification for using deadly force against protesters. Creates new felony penalties for unlawful protests for any protesters that block traffic, as well as new penalty for organizers. So this is where we're at 1 year later. And so now we're going to talk. Like we said, we have created a space that has felt comfortable, confident. So we are not going to attack anyone. You might feel strongly by what someone says, and you can certainly say you disagree with the statement rather than the person. No personal attacks toward each other. We're in a really small group, so I'm going to only do 2 breakout rooms, shoot y'all in there. talk for 10 minutes, come back, talk full group. We're just gonna be talking for the rest of the event. Because I want people to have time to reflect, to debrief. I've been talking a lot, my mouth is dry. But we did want to give you a fully formed understanding of what's been going on in the world in the last year. I feel extremely excited about a lot of the things that have happened over the last year. And I also feel super discouraged in moments around what's happened in the last year. And I think what keeps that encouragement up for me, at least, is knowing that 1 year later, we have folks that are still coming in. We have people who are still committed to this work. We have people who are still doing the work. So we are going to hit that button. Our first option for breakout rooms are, what commitments did you make to yourself last year? So I know for me that I had made a lot of commitments to myself around self-care. Because self-care is an integral part of being a organizer, being an educator, being an advocate. We forget about that part. So I made a lot of commitments to myself about self-care, and I've kind of kept them a little bit. Not great, a little bit. And did they remain the same over the course of the last year or not? So I'm going to shoot you all into those breakout rooms in just a second. I am the queen of forgetting what the breakout room is about once I get into the breakout room. So I'm going to share the question in the chat so everyone has access to it. But thank you so much for bearing with me. Breakout rooms happening in a few seconds. Are we ready? Ready, Freddy. Ready, steady. Eva, come on, we got this. Here we go. And open. Boom. See y'all in 10 minutes. Okay. Are we all back? Is everybody back? Is that like a thing? Let's see. I think everyone's here. Okay, cool. We'll go with it. So, what kind of happened? I was in one group, so I missed out on what was going on in the other group, and you all missed out what was going on in the other group. So, any really insightful things that came up for you in the breakout rooms?
We spoke about like how you said self-care was like very important because last year was very traumatic. So one of the commitments that I made was to give myself like rest and time to, not stress myself out too much, even though I felt like I was doing so much last year, just to take breaks and know that I'm not like, the CEO of pushing, and to just like give myself some rest was basically, yeah.
Beautiful. Anything else folks want to share full group before we head into our next room?
So I have one. However, I actually didn't achieve this commitment. We happened to be talking about reading books. Kayla made a commitment to doing that, and she read some books last year. I made a commitment and didn't read any books. However, Jamal gave some great advice at the end and was like, just because I was like, any tips, Kayla? How did you, achieve your commitment? And he said, start with 5 minutes a day for a week, move to 10, move to 15, and onward. Like anyone can do something for 5 minutes a day. And I didn't get the chance to say, I appreciate that so much. And I actually think I'm going to do that. So thank you.
I like that.
Happy to be of service.
My dad says great, insightful things sometimes. So we're going to kind of move forward. So our next breakout room in this one is, I am so excited to see what happens. So excited so much so that we created a Jamboard so that we can record these, because I really want to know what have you learned about yourself and what have you learned about the country in the past year? I think I heard so much about that folks had to say about feeling overwhelmed and feeling like, I don't even know, just feeling like they learned so much about the place where they lived in such a short period of time. And it was extraordinarily enlightening for them. So I'm wondering, what are the specific things that you all learned over the course of this last year? And so I am going to, in the chat, first put the question, because that's important. And then I am going to put our link to our so I can't talk all of a sudden, like that just decided it didn't want to work anymore. But I link to our Jamboard, and for anyone who's never used Jamboard before, I'm just going to do a very, 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 very short synopsis because I don't think that anyone will have an issue. All we have to do, let me share my screen super, super quickly, is this little button right here gives you a sticky note. You can type out what you wanted to say, add your name at the bottom if you want, and if not, you don't have to. Pick and change your color to make it cute and beautiful for you, and then you'd press save, and then the sticky note's gonna come right on the board with everybody else. So this is what we're doing. What have you learned about yourself and the country in the past year? I'm gonna share this out so that everyone has the link, and I am excited to see what comes of this. So in the chat, you have both the question and the link. Those breakout rooms are open. I cannot wait to see what you all had to say at the end. All right, all right. I'm seeing smiles. That's always a good sign. I am seeing some notes in our Padlet. I'm making them bigger so everybody can see what folks were saying. I learned how to politicize every aspect of the country, or how politicized every aspect of the country is. I learned political parties are archaic and drive people apart, and our country needs to quit treating the Constitution as God-given. Whoo, whoo. I learned that the country will do everything to make you feel like what you're doing is not enough. Wow. The size does not mean anything. I'm just making them bigger. Doing things in my own authentic way and not allowing the world to dictate my pace. I've learned that this allows much more grace for me to move forward. I love that. The greater need to continue due to the pandemic. I think it's shown how important it is for us to connect and connect even more in the physical sense. Beautiful. I love it. I love it. Was there anything that came up? Any beautiful? Ooh, we have another one. I learned of what I was taught and knew I learned that a lot of what I was taught and knew about the country, I now had to unlearn. Yeah, that's a big one. Another thing my dad talks about a lot is the importance of unlearning. So that's a huge one for us. I love these. I love these. Thank you so much. So we're running out of time. We love to talk, y'all. We are running out of time. So I'm going to push past full group talk and give us another 10 minutes in breakouts to now make some new commitments and also think about the things that we need in order to maintain those commitments. So we already had Erin say last year, I made a commitment to read more and learn more, and I failed to do that. And now I have a plan in place for how I'm gonna do it. So let's get into those breakout rooms and talk together about what commitments we wanna make in our everyday lives. I'm just talking and I realize do not have my screen shared and you guys are like, what is she looking at right now? Let me get it together. Boom. And so what commitments can you make in your everyday life to make sure that you are continuing to make changes that are not publicized? So it's not necessary that we're making these changes because we want our next door neighbor to think we're anti-racist. We're making these changes because this is something that we truly believe in, right? And so what are the things that we still need? What are the things we still want to learn about? And that information, please keep it in top of mind so you can put it in the post-event survey, because we want to create these events to be responsive. If you folks need more information on, I don't know, how to create a culturally responsive lesson or whatever, we want to be able to create that space for you. So breakout rooms, 10 more minutes with the same folks, go into conversation, and see you in a little bit. Welcome back for the final time tonight. So in the chat, if folks can please begin to kind of roll in those commitments that they made. So if you made a commitment, use the chat, roll those commitments in so that we can start to think about and see other people's commitments, get ideas, and hold each other accountable in this community. Because this is a community. Our DMs are always open, our emails are always open, and we'll make sure that you have access to all that information before we end out. So with the 9 minutes that we have left and the folks putting their commitments into the chat, please also place what resources you still need. We want to create those for you. We want to send them to you. We want to give you every and anything that will help you on your journey to maintaining your commitment to being anti-racist practitioner. So if it's book titles, if it's book clubs, if it's anti-racist topics, what are those resources that you all still need? Because we certainly want to be a part of providing them. As we continue to move forward, I will always say this every time. I am not, will not, cannot ever be the voice of all Black people, but I do like to leave space for questions. So if there are questions that came up about anything that we talked about tonight, or anything that just came to mind in your conversations, please let me know. Please come off mute, ask the question, put it in the chat. I'm going to leave space right now for anyone who has any questions or comments that they'd like to share as we begin to close out tonight. Give it another 20 seconds. I know I'm a slow thinker. It would be cool to just have a book club. Okay, so maybe we're doing a book club. Love it. All right, so we'll put that in our chunk of ideas that we sit and talk about in all of our Black on Black education events. Thank you. All right, so I'm gonna respect the silence on questions, but I will give you other ways to contact us just in case you think of things later. And I'm seeing, okay, people are, this book club idea, it's coming in. Hi, my dog is like, mommy, please.
What a cutie.
You've been sitting there for an hour and a half, and I would really like to play. Give mommy 7 more minutes, okay? Go. All right, so post-event survey, there's a link coming in the chat for you right now. Please give us feedback. We use the feedback, we read the feedback. I love the feedback. So please let us know how we did, what we can better do, anything that you could, he is so big now, I know. Yes, let us know what we can do better, how we can better serve you. That is what this space is for and will continue to be for. We do these events for free because we love do the work. But if you feel so inclined and are in a position to do so, please donate to Black on Black education. It allows us to keep doing the work. It allows us to keep supporting students. It allows us to keep supporting educators. And so we thank you for when you do donate. And so contact information, we want to make sure that you know how to reach out to us if you have questions, comments, concerns. So you can reach me at eva@blackonblackeducation.com. Again, I'm a slow questioner. So like I'll sit there the whole time, but I have no questions. And then like 45 minutes later, I'm like, I have 35 questions. So if that happens to you, eva@blackonblackeducation.com is open. I'm great with email, so I will respond to you. Instagram @blackonblacked. Our DMs are open. We answer. We love you. Even when you just heart our messages, we are like, oh my gosh, thank you for hearting our message. Like, we love you. Our Twitter is @blackonblacked. We are not as active on there, but if you reach out out to us through there, we will get back to you. Black on Black Education t-shirts. We see Anna rocking hers because she's fly. I've got mine on. Look, it's perfect. Oh, Erin's got hers. Oh my goodness. Everybody's out here looking just stunting. I love it. So if you want to have a beautiful conversation started, because every time I go out, someone asks me a question about this, go to our website, blackandblackeducation.com, and you can purchase a t-shirt for yourself. It'll also be in the post-event email. Thank you, thank you, thank you. It means a lot to me that you decided to spend an hour and a half with me on a Tuesday night, especially those of you who are educators and have been dealing with these kids all day. So I am thankful, 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 thankful. And that is 1 year later. I hope you all learned something new, had time to engage, met someone new, and enjoyed your time with us. We're so grateful. We're so thankful. Have a great rest of your night. I'll hang out here if anybody has questions. Bye, everybody.